Hey guys, it's Octane. I'm here with a mini photo edit tutorial. Hope you guys enjoy. Alright guys, so for the first thing, I'm going to show you about contrast. Now, if you have a dark background and you have a bit of a fade because of the lighting or whatever it was, the contrast is the first thing I like to mess with on the photo. So basically, if it's a little bit faded like that and you can see that the dark background is actually, it's got light in it, you want to add some contrast. So when you add the contrast, the background will get darker and your image that you want that's kind of faded will brighten up. You don't want to add too much contrast because if you do, then you see it gets really weird. So you just want a little bit, and then yeah, so that's basically it for the dark background. So like I said, if you have like a little bit of a fade on your photos or something like that, add some contrast. But sometimes you could have the photo where it's you could see that there's kind of a lot of darkness and stuff like that. And that's where you got to kind of figure out what you want, because sometimes people will see it's dark, they'll add brightness, but look what happens. It's no good. So you got to figure out, do you need the brightness or is it too dark because there's too much contrast? So the first thing that I always like to do is mess with the contrast. Either it goes up because the image has a little bit of lighting or it's fadey, so you want to add that contrast, or you want to go down because it's a little bit too dark in areas. Alright, so the next thing I want to talk about is the saturation. So basically, the photo that you see right here, it's taken at, like, it's just normal photo. But the thing is this is what happens with regular photos in real life as well. In real life, the photo, I mean, like, let's say you take a picture of a car. It looks beautiful in real life, but then when you take the photo, it's like, hey, what happened to the color? Well, you want to mess with the saturation. So you see here, I'm on wood, but the problem is it's really faded. So you add that saturation, not too much because look, the color is just whack, but if you add just a little bit, you actually get that wood color look. But it's the same with the contrast. You don't want too much because too much is just overkill and then it makes your quality look really weird. So you just want a little bit. And as I said before, the best thing to do is to get your contrast before, and I'll show you what I mean. If you lower the contrast, this is what it looks like. It's always got that little bit of fade. I don't know why photos always do that, but it's got a fade. So you want the contrast, which adds, it kind of adds a little bit of sharpness too, if you notice. And then like I said before, you add a little bit of that saturation, not too much, and there you go. You have nice color and you have a nice dark kind of sharpness to your photo. Here's another example. Sometimes you have photos that you'll notice, like if you have sunlight or something like that, you'll notice that like things are yellow. And then it'll be like on the car, for an example, you see on the side there's like that yellowish. Well, that's because there's too much saturation in the photo because of sunlight or stuff like that. So if you notice, you bring down the sunlight, you notice that the bricks on the ground become not natural color again, and that yellowness is not on that car anymore. So that's another example with the saturation. Now for brightness, brightness is a little bit tricky because if you add too much, you start to get that crazy glow around your image, and it's just weird. So the thing is like on Instagram, for an example, you have highlights and you have brightness. My suggestion is you mess with the highlights just a little bit, because when you do that, it'll actually add just a tiny bit. Like you see that little difference here? It goes from dark to like normal. Well, that's kind of what highlights do, right? And as you can see, the brightness level is at 0. but I'm just showing you like from darkness and then you go back to normal. That's kind of what the highlights do. So my suggestion is if you're using Instagram for your photos, mess with the highlights first, and then if it doesn't do you justice on how dark your image is, then you can add a little bit of brightness. But my suggestion is if you use brightness, only use it a little bit and keep adjusting it just a little bit until you can find that sweet spot, because too much of it is just, it just kills the photo so much. Alright, so for this next part, it's going to be a little tricky to understand, I guess, but I can't show you on GTA. But for Instagram photos, you have structure and you have sharpness. Now, what I like to do is I like to mess with the structure before the sharpness. And this is the only kind of way I could give you an example on GTA. Now, you see the image has a fade in the background and in the center where my character is in the car. Now, my example to you is when you add structure, it'll make the blurry edges and stuff like that in the center of the photo and a little bit around, but more on the center of the photo. It'll make it pop out and not be so blurry, right? So to go from that to this with with the structure, sorry. Now with the sharpness, it'll actually add all the way around. So that's why I say to mess with the structure before the sharpness, because if you go sharpness and then you go to structure, you're going to mess the whole photo quality up. It's not going to work out the way you want it. I'm just going to show you guys a little bit on how I do my photos. So basically the depth of field, I always go to none. Well, not always, it depends. Like if I don't want the background, I won't mess with that. But right now I want to see everything on the photo. So I'll go to none. I go to effects. I always put this down to -100 because I don't like the blackness around my photo. And in like this'll add, if you add it, it'll have a bunch of darkness around and sometimes in your photo. I like to go to -100 because I find that it pops out the image more. Then I'll add some contrast, not too much. Saturation, it really depends. Sometimes it's too high, sometimes you want to go lower. Right now I'm going to go lower. Add just a bit of brightness, not too much. See, I'm only going on 2. And then basically that's it. There's really not a lot to do, but it took me a long time to figure it out. Like I was adding way too much stuff, and then I thought like, oh well, this is the way to do it, and it's really hard to figure out at first. But it's because at first I think we're trying to add too much because we think that it's gonna look better, or I don't know. That's what I was doing anyway. And then you see like you add the contrast, you add the saturation, but sometimes you don't need it at all. Thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully this video helped you out. I didn't go too much into depth about it because it could be really confusing, so I kind of just gave you a little bit of tips and tricks.